Live streaming is on.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Jitsi Community Call. We have a ton of people here. Welcome, everyone. Very nice to have you. We're going to go, for those of you who are new, the way we usually do this is that we go through an informal, unstructured table tour of additions that have happened to Jitsi in the past couple of weeks, anything that's relevant. And then we open the microphone for questions from the floor. So with that said, let's start. Probably one of the first things that I wanted to mention is that there have been a number of questions asking for explanations on how exactly Jitsi handles different security aspects. So we have published what we believe to be a full description of anything relevant to this matter on jitsi.org/security. Go ahead and check that out because it contains important information. We are also currently, so something that we've previously debated, the fact that all communication that Jitsi exchanges with the server is currently encrypted on the wire, and we are currently investigating the possibilities to add a second layer of encryption on top of that will also make it end-to-end encrypted. So stay tuned for that. We're pretty excited about that project. Now, I'm opening the floor to other people in the dev team who would like to make an update about recent changes. Maybe we could start with the Octo tweaks. Boris, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in the last few weeks, one of the things we've been concentrating on is making sure that this service can scale, because we've seen a large increase in traffic. So a couple of weeks ago, we had to disable Octo and stop interconnecting shards because the way we used to scale could not support the number of servers that we now have. So we've been working on enabling Octo again. Octo is the protocol that we use for using cascaded bridges on the server side. So where we are with this project is we tweaked the load balancing in GCOFO so that it uses packet rate instead of bit rate. So load is distributed more even, and we enabled a mode where it uses more than one bridge, not for geolocation purposes, but to distribute load. So if this feature were turned on right now, since we have 48 people in this conference, we would likely be using more than one server. So we merged the code and we enabled it in some parts of the system. However, we are still monitoring to make sure that everything works as expected, and we're seeing some minor glitches, so we'll be working on this some more. But expect this to be enabled here on Meet soon, and the code is already in, so if there's any interest in that, you can just go ahead and pull the latest version of Jitsi Video Bridge and GCOFO. There's no extra configuration that is required. It should just, compared to regular Octo setup, it should just work out of the box. So I think that's pretty much all. Would anyone else like to add something?
While we're looking for the next person to speak up, we have been running for more than 2 weeks now with WebSockets by default on Meet Jitsi, compared to the previous utilization of Bosch long poles. And so far, things look good. We don't have any reason to believe that this is causing issues. It did cause issues with the other components in the Jitsi system, though, that had to be solved. So if you're switching to WebSockets, make sure that you're running latest of everything, specifically because of the stream management configuration in XMPP. Things might break for your gbrees and other components, BMBG gases. Things might break if you don't. Anyone else from the team wants to add anything else?
Just the part that it's still not used on mobile. I'm working on changes there. And as I promised, I will post, I will write a post on the community forum which describes all the things you need to transition to WebSockets.
Sounds good. Yes, thank you for that. Anyone else from the team?
But Damon, do you want to talk about JVB2 stable?
Yeah, I was just about.
Oh, that's a pretty important one.
So since the last community call, we moved all our packages to depend on JVB2. And we pushed several stable versions. Because when there are many situations and we were trying to upgrade, moving from components to using mugs for the default installations and getting rid of Jitsi and completely dependent on Nginx or Apache. Nginx is the default choice. There were a few issues on the way, so that's why we pushed several stables in a row, fixing all those problems. And we were hearing from people. We were trying to reply to everybody in the community forum, help them fix the problems while we fix them in the packages itself. There are still few issues we know about and we are currently working on, so probably there will be a new stable release this week fixing those. It's mainly on the latest Debian, some package reordering and stuff, but yeah, so JV2 is out, and in general the clean install should work. Most of the problems were coming from people installing and purging the deployment several times, and we are working on fixing all those and these reordering issues. So it will come later this week, I think.
And thank you, Damien, for all the hard work you've put there. Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
And I'll just say thanks, Damien, too, because the other thing he did some work on was the releases page on the Jitsi Video Bridge GitHub now more distinctly tags the Video Bridge releases that we consider stable, which is something a lot of people have asked about in the past. So.
Great. Anyone else from the team?
We've launched many more turn servers to account for the amount of load we're getting. So hopefully everybody's peer-to-peer calls, if they had to go through turn, are getting better quality than ever. So.
Yeah, we have actually launched many more of everything, to be clear too. But turn servers were one particularly big pain point, since those were extremely overutilized. So yeah, thanks for bringing it up, Aaron. Any other updates anyone would wish to make from the team? Going once, going twice. And we're now moving into the freeform section of this call, not that the previous one was very unfree. Questions and comments from the floor. So we had a couple of questions right before. Chigai, do you want to state yours again?
Yeah, so I picked up my hand. I don't know if everyone can see that.
Well, yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask how big is the scope the integration with the matrix.org project. So are there any, are you thinking about any state calls? Do you have like a call state diagram or something like that, ringing states? I heard before about the scaling of people in general, that it's not too good for over 100 people. And yeah, the PSTN connections, is there thinking about doing that? And in general, the Matrix project, how you stand to it as a company, as Jitsi, as the project Jitsi with Matrix.
Yeah. So first of all, is there anyone from Matrix here that would like to take this, or should I run with it? I suppose not. So next time we're going to ask Matt to join us. The relationship between Jitsi and Matrix and Riot is rather clearly delimited. So Jitsi has this function that it's very easily iframeable into other products, which is how we integrate it in our, sort of day job products like 8x8, and which is also how others like Rocket Chat or Matrix integrate it in theirs. Matrix specifically run a deployment of their own of the vanilla Jitsi projects. I'm not familiar with, I cannot speak to the exact configuration of that because they're free to configure it however they wish. But the relationship is essentially every time you go into a multi-party call, you iframe into Jitsi Meet, and that is by default configured to use their deployment. You can switch that to whatever other deployment you want to do. So let's say that you're deploying your own Matrix servers, and you want to control, you want full privacy on your video communication as well. Ideally, you would just go and deploy your Jitsi instances as well, and then you would configure Matrix to use those for your communication. Now, making it part of call flows so that I ring you, you pick up, and then we both end up on Jitsi. I assume that's what you sort of meant. That is something that we would absolutely love to do. I don't believe anyone is working on it right now. I personally am a big fan of call flows. I think they're very appropriate for the blocking sort of communication that video conferencing is. And it's much more appropriate than, hey, here's a link, I'm going to wait for you there. Well, I'm tired of waiting. And now the other person is, well, I went there was no one there. Where did you go? And all that stuff. I believe that if you are required to just sit and watch an empty screen, then there should be a social contract of how long this thing is going on for. And then if you're telling me to go where and be blocked, then I should also know when that invitation expired. So all of that is purely solved by the call flows. And oh, here's Matt. Thank you for joining, Matt. You're going to be able to talk a little bit more about that. So what we are currently thinking about is a different sort of integration, which is being able to reuse the trust that you have established in Matrix while you are having calls on Jitsi in a way where we reuse your key negotiation that happened on Matrix to also end-to-end encrypt the calls on Jitsi. Now, as I said, looking into that second layer of end-to-end encryption is something that we're currently working on. So that's still a very much in progress project. So I would say any potential integration that might happen with Matrix keying is a step 2 sort of thing, because we first have to figure out, okay, how are we going to do our keying? How are we going to allow external parties to do that? So it's still very much on the drawing board. And now, if you have any questions that are more specific to Matrix, you also have the ultimate authority here, so he'll be able to answer.
Just before we go on to that, there's a president of the PSTN connection to Jitsi with 8x8. Maybe you can elaborate on that. What do they use exactly? Do they use SIP, WebRTC? What's going on there?
They use, we use, I should say, the Jitsi component that is open source and part of the project. So there's a leg of that call, which is WebRTC, sort of, from Jitsi to Video Bridge. And then there's a leg of that call, which is purely SIP. And that ends up being on PSTN. Does that make sense? It is purely an invitation-based thing for now. Actually, on me, it's a rendezvous point still, so you have to send information to someone, they have to dial in. In certain 8x8 products, there's also the ability to dial out from within the meeting to a phone, but then that remains a purely phone conversation. There is still no ability to make an outbound video call and for someone to pick up with video. Does that make sense? Right. Thank you. Any questions for Matt?
Well, I can say the exact question I asked before. It was like, how big is the scope of the integration with Jitsi? But for Matt, it's how big is the scope of the integration with Jitsi, and what exactly is going on there with the call states? Is there a call state diagram? Is there a ringing state? Because on the matrix.org website, you can find a very limited 3 states kind of diagram or explanation. Is there anything else going on in preparation or something?
So yeah, I think I caught some of Emil's explanation, which is of course correct. We're basically just iframing Jitsi in to Matrix. We have this concept in Matrix called widgets, which are basically iframes that allow you to put any web content you like into a given chat room. For Jitsi, though, we've also special cased it so that you can use the React Native SDKs on the mobile Matrix clients to embed Jitsi properly onto mobile. So it's a little better than just having an iframe. But in terms of call signaling, there isn't any at the moment at all. There is just a Matrix state event, as we call it, which is the key value in a given chat room that basically says, hey, please put this URL as a thing that people can interact with. However, we'd be certainly interested in doing richer call flows. And as you said, we also have one-to-one WebRTC call signaling, very similar to SET in Matrix as part of the standard itself. And that could be extended, complete with the end-to-end encryption that we have in Matrix, to be used for SFU signaling, much as Prosody and XMPP is used today inside Jitsi as the signaling channel for the Jingle WebRTC negotiation that's going on behind the scenes. So there could be scope to work more closely together on it. We've been looking a bit at doing using the end-to-end encryption in Matrix for the call signaling in general, but it has some issues in terms of WebRTC not exposing the APIs in the browser that you need for it to work, at least in browser, to be able to secure the media streams properly. We're looking a little bit, after having spoken with Emil a week or two ago about this, about enabling it anyway, but just not in the web, but instead doing it in desktop and on mobile. But at the moment, that's sci-fi. So in terms of how we run it ourselves, we just stood up a new deployment, which is a cluster, Elastic cluster of JVBs sitting on AWS at jitsi.modular.im. Mainly because our previous one exploded under all of the interest in Jitsi after the pandemic lockdowns began a few weeks ago. And we put out a blog post this morning, actually, showing how you can set up a Matrix server alongside Jitsi using the Debian packages of both, allowing you to self-host your Jitsi alongside self-hosting your Matrix server, which previously was a massive pain because you had to use an intermediary integration manager to set up the widget, the iframes, the Jitsi call, whereas now you just point right straight at the URL and it embeds it straight in. So it's much, much, much easier to do. So sorry for monologuing. Hopefully that answers a whole bunch of questions.
Thanks. That was very, very useful. Thank you very much.
That's okay.
Thank you very much, Matt, for stopping by.
That's okay.
Mic is open again. Questions from the floor.
There were a couple in the chat earlier that did not get answered.
Hello. Can I go ahead for the questions?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm pretty new with using Jitsi, and I have integrated Jitsi plugin with Moodle. So I want to know, apart from integration of the plugin, do I have to do anything else to make it uh, acceptable to approximately 30 odd participants?
Actually, you don't need any plugin. So if you want to, if your question is just about making it work for 30 participants, this is entirely a matter of resources. 30 participants is not that challenging of a crowd. As you can see here, we currently have a 48. So you could probably achieve that with a single machine as long as it's beefy enough. So this call is currently hosted on C5X large AWS instance, which is 4 cores and 8 gigs of RAM. I would say that's probably on the low side for things that size. So you might want to beef it up a little bit more. If you want to go beyond that, then and if you want to have multiple of those calls happening simultaneously, especially in that case, you need to consider splitting the deployment between what we call signaling nodes that host Jitsi's conference focus that we call GCOFO. We're very good at naming, by the way. So GCOFO is our signaling component that connects to a Prosody server, and those have to live on a server of their own, and then you could put multiple bridges behind them. If you go to, so they would load balance, and the packet rate-based load balancing that Boris explained at the beginning of the call is what will happen there. And we're seeing that that works pretty well. What will also land in the future is the ability to split a conference over multiple bridges, which is in the code currently, but we don't advise using it yet. We're still experimenting and tweaking it so that it would be more reliable. If you go to jitsi.org/tutorials, you will find information on how to set up exploded deployments of that sort. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, sure. So I want to know one thing, like currently we have added the Jitsi plugin in Moodle, and we haven't done any of the setup on our server side, but then too we can able to communicate easily. So I want to know how we are doing. Are we using your server for the communication?
Oh, okay. Wait, that's what you meant by plugin. I'm sorry, I missed the Moodle part.
Right.
So, yes, okay, got it. I'm actually not super familiar with how the Moodle plugin works, but if you didn't set up a Jitsi server and it's working, then you're likely using this server here, which is meet.jitsi, which is fine. You can keep doing it, but it does mean that you trust us to not do bad things to you, which I promise that we won't. But it's up to you whether you trust me or not.
No, we do trust you.
Thank you.
I have a question in terms of the development priorities.
So up to 30 participants, we can easily trust your server, right?
If we're speaking, yes, you can. 30 is something that we believe is supported well on the current configuration. There was a question from Kyle.
Yeah, so I have a question about the streaming point. So I know this is in development. Right now you can stream to YouTube. I use Wowza a lot, and I'd like to be able to, simulcast this to, they can do Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. So is there any plan to kind of move that hard coding away from purely YouTube? I know that's probably in the plan. I'm just wondering what the priority is.
Well, sorry, Brian, looked like you wanted to.
Yeah, I did a branch with this. I did a branch with this a while back. That's probably a bit rotted by now, but the main blocker was just that we need to make sure. I think we decided that we wanted to make sure we had the ability to enforce a whitelist on the thing, and I hadn't gotten around to implementing the whitelist part of that. So it hasn't been a big priority compared to some of the other stuff. So I haven't got back around to it. Somebody opened a PR for it, but I made
just to be clear. To be sure that I understand, Brian, though, you're specifically talking about the ability to stream to other RTMP destinations, but I don't believe we've discussed the ability to simulcast to several destinations, right? That's how important this
the,
VR.
the Wowza would handle the simulcast. So this is just,
Oh,
I want to be able to
okay,
intake
got it.
a WebRTC, and then Wowza does all of the transcoding. So it's
Got
just,
it. Sorry.
rather than pointing to YouTube, I want to point to my Wowza server.
And there we go. We can, I don't know, the priority depends on the amount of remaining work, I would say. Brian, do you have any suggestions here about how we could make the workload on us lesser?
No, I don't. You mean as far as somebody helping with that that code? Does that mean? Oh, yeah. So there's somebody opened a bug for this. I'm sure if you're commenting on it, you've probably seen that one. In that bug, I linked to my branch. Or sorry, it was a PR opened. I think I linked to my branch. So if someone wants to pick up that branch, and if there's any permission problem or anything with that, I don't think there should be from cloning it. But if you wanted to do that, that would be welcome. And I think
I did.
It's a bit old.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit old. The Jitsi we haven't changed a lot lately, so hopefully it hasn't rotted too much. But that should kind of lay out the approach of how I was going to go at it.
And the idea for the whitelist.
Hard code this time. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
The idea for the whitelist is mostly about trying to keep people from sort of maliciously causing a Jitsi conference to be streamed to an unexpected RTMP server. It would probably need to be configured on the Jibri, if I recall correctly, Brian.
Yeah, the idea would be to add a field in the config that would support, like, I don't know, there's a few ways we could go with that, depending on how fancy you want to get, if it's just domains or regex or whatever. I hadn't gotten to that part, but the idea would be something in the config that we could load. And if you want to, on your personal deployment, you want to let people use whatever they want, that'd be fine. But I think when we talked about this for Meet Jitsi, we just wanted to make sure we had the ability to kind of limit it to some, so we didn't have to get in any issues with people DDoSing someone's RTMP server or something.
Okay, I got it. If I'm not super, I'm not a super programmer, but I do know Wowza really well. I'll look at the code and I'll play around with it. If I discover anything, I'll share it with you guys.
Thank you, Kyle.
Cool, thanks.
Other questions?
Sure, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I've noticed that lip syncing isn't very crisp. And on the community call 2 weeks ago, the recording, for example, demonstrates this very well. I posted this on the forum, but didn't get a response to it. Any thoughts on lip syncing, especially on the recordings?
So on the recordings, the ones that I did see that post, we haven't had time to explore that very deeply. We suspect it was likely an issue with the recorder itself, given the behavior. Now, lip syncing is always a compromise, right? Because you having perfect sync also means potentially accumulating latency. So there's always a place at which it would just unsync if things become too hectic. We have made improvements recently. Jonathan made some work on lip syncing specifically, but they're all in. So whatever you're seeing now is kind of the best that we're able to do at this point. If we have, indications for things that we believe we can be fixed, then we'll look at it in the future. But right now, we're kind of happy with where we are at. Jonathan, would you like to add something here, or?
I believe actually on Meet Jitsi at least, there were some client-side bugs that caused us to turn the lip sync support off. Because it was introducing some issues I didn't quite understand on client side. I think, as I recall, when we had the flag on, the lip sync was better, but there were cases where the client would get confused about some things. So maybe somebody on the client side can speak to that.
Yes, so actually the WebRTC lip sync is disabled because that requires GCall for the server component to do some modifications there, and this functionality is broken right now, so that's why it's disabled. It has some bugs. I didn't have time to look.
So I was clearly wrong with we're happy with where it's at. I forgot that we had disabled it. So then it would be a matter of, so Pavel, was that the same thing with, audio streams would never start if video doesn't arrive. Is that what we're talking about?
Probably, but also like video displayed for another participant and things like that. So.
Oh, okay. So then in that case, I would say the priority would be something that we might not be looking at immediately, which would imply higher likelihood that speech would desynchronize from image in certain cases. Based on experience, though, it's not that bad. In many cases, it ends up being fine. So this is just about improving the performance a bit. So anyways, we're going to try and look into it as soon as we can. If someone can help with that, help is most welcome. I don't know if someone wants to add any more questions here.
If I could jump in just to with one of these resolution questions again. We were taking a look at enabling layer suspension, which my understanding basically allows us to turn off the simulcast of the highest resolutions in the case where someone is not on the dock or someone's not on the stage. I'm curious if in general, like our highest resolution is 720, if that will still work or if that only works for HD and that level of resolution. For example, if our highest resolution was 720, we only wanted to use that when someone was on the stage, could we just turn this on and that would take care of it? Or is there something special you have to do in the case of lower resolutions?
No, in theory that will. It'll suspend whatever layers basically above the base that exist that aren't being used, regardless of their resolution. So it doesn't care about resolution. Now, I say in theory because this feature is actually broke in the transition to JVB2, and we didn't rush to fix it because it has complications around when Octo was being used. Basically, it wouldn't work well with Octo because currently we're always forwarding all layers. So we didn't really scramble to re-implement that. And then we had issues with Octo, and then all the other stuff came up. So we haven't gotten back around to it. We do plan on doing that, but I don't know when that's going to be.
And so today, it does not work if we're using JVB2.
Yeah, JVB2 does not do any layer suspension. The bridge doesn't send the message to the clients telling it when it can turn those layers off.
Got it. And so in terms of, when you, to the extent, obviously you guys know a lot more about this than I do, to the extent that you guys have that off and you're still doing simulcast, do you have a good sense of what people should expect in terms of performance, both on the uploading and downloading side, when you're having a big chat room like this with HD? In terms of simulcasting?
Could you elaborate what you mean by like performance?
Is it mostly about bandwidth or?
No, CPU. Sorry, like CPU performance in terms of the setting out multiple compression levels and setting that up and then pulling that down.
So in terms of so these are questions. The question to answer is one around bandwidth. So I'll just start there. Even though you're more interested in CPU, the bandwidth you probably if you turn on your video now, you just see what it does. It'll be around 3.5 megabits per second, something like that. It will fluctuate because we do bandwidth probing and things like that. But that's what you should expect.
I should expect that at full resolution, at HD resolution with simulcast. You
should expect that at 720p.
Okay, 720p.
I think by memory, if memory serves me right, the 1080p numbers go to about 5 megabits per second, but I'm not extremely confident of that number right now. So the CPU question is extremely hard to answer because it depends a lot on what hardware you're running. So right now, for example, I'm on a fairly recent MacBook Pro, and that essentially uses one core of it. So I don't know if that's helpful. There's no in terms of server download and stuff like that. It's really, or rather in terms of what users see as incoming bit rate, it doesn't have an impact. because they're not getting the high quality layers anyway.
Right, that makes sense. And so just to wrap it up, it sounds like you're saying that if I'm using HD, if I'm uploading HD and I'm doing simulcast, so I'm setting 3 different basically 3 different resolutions, I should expect that on my Mac I'm basically using one of my whatever it is 4 cores. That's what you're saying. Got it. All right.
As
cool.
a very rough guideline. Yeah.
Yeah. Got it. Thank you very much.
Does the resolution change in terms of what at higher resolutions? Does the aspect ratio change in terms of what the client by default sends to the server, or is that always?
No, the aspect ratio shouldn't be fluctuating within the same call. That's not something you should see. The resolution of all layers, I believe Chrome could change that. If someone in the team, please fix me. Please fix me. Well, fix me too, but please correct me if I'm wrong. But I don't believe that. So I think that could happen with Chrome, and especially between Chrome versions and even Firefox, right? Well, we don't do simulcast with Firefox today, but when we do, you could end up in a situation where all the layers have modified resolution potentially, but I don't believe that aspect ratio is likely to change.
Okay, just curious. I have a question just about what was brought up earlier in the call about the recent changes with Muck and XMPP. Is there? Did I hear correctly that there's been a sort of shift? I know I heard about moving away from Bosch to using WebSockets, but has there also been any change around sort of the default behavior of using component versus sort of a client connection, client XMPP connection, or maybe just in general? Is there anything else that sort of you guys could elaborate as far as the changes that are being made? I know we talked about this on the last call, because we'd be really excited to use some of those updates now that they seem to be pretty close to available. But yeah, it'd be great to hear a little bit more detail if that's possible.
Does anyone else want to jump in on these things? I think we mentioned some of them. It's by the way, I want to correct myself. When I said I'm using currently 1 core, I meant this for all of Jitsi Meet. So that would have included the several thumbnail videos that I'm getting here, not just encoding. So with regard to optimizations, we should probably just do, so Saul has a presentation that he'll do on the Matrix call, I think this week, about some of the battles that we had to fight with regard to this massive scale up. I'm actually not sure what to say, because there are absolutely optimizations in Jitsi and GT Video Bridge that would be a good reason to keep with the latest. Boris mentioned improvements around Octo. Specifically, the packet rate optimization came in within the past 2 weeks. Are you asking if there are any other additional performance-related things there, or we haven't done any Prosody changes in configuration since? No, we haven't. Yeah.
Were there any changes as far as is Jacofo still using a sort of XMPP component? Is it sort of used or because I think most of the places there's been a shift to using a client exit, like a sort of regular client connection as opposed to a Prosody component. Is that still the case? Have there been any other changes sort of on the Muck side?
No, we haven't changed, right? We haven't changed that. I don't believe we have.
Yes.
Yeah, there is Bridge is using Muck. Yeah.
So I also have a question regarding this. So we saw a brief spike in Prosody in the memory usage. Just wondering what is your recommendation, because I know usually Prosody has a very low memory overhead, but then there seems to be these brief spikes. And what we saw is then when that happens, so Prosody restarted, and then Jacofo was sort of, I think the component part of Jacofo had trouble reconnecting. And I was just wondering whether you have any information on that, whether you know about this problem, or I saw there were recently some commits around retries. I don't know if that's any way related, or whether you're trying to move away from that component model anyway. Yeah, so that's also a similar topic.
So currently there is just one component, and that is Jacofo.
Right, that's the one that I meant hasn't changed. But yes, Bridge has been on Mux Pro.
Yeah, Bridge is on Mux. We moved away from component there, and the retries you have seen, those are probably those in JVB, and they're just install time that if you do a clean installation, and we just needed to retry several more times before Prosody starts up during the setting up of the Debian packages, and that was the only change that probably you will not see if you're in this auto-scaling situation where your Prosody is running and you just scale up bridges. That's one of the reasons to move to Mux is the auto-scaling. It's easier than having many components definitions in Prosody.
Is there any other strategies you guys use as far as Jacofo being is sort of a potential single point of failure?
We have more of it. We have tons of it. We have plenty of Jacofos around it. The way we structure our deployment is shards of multiple bridges behind Jacofos, and we just multiply the shards.
Okay, but you have that approach with HA proxy. Like, do you do any type of like failover if when a Jacofo goes down for an active conference? Is there? Do you try to like you're able to like shift everybody to a new Jacofo through that?
Yes.
Yeah, but with disruption. Sorry, go ahead, Jake.
It depends on how it goes down. If it goes down hard and the health checks stop and everything, then it will be taken out of rotation and everyone will get moved with disruption. So you'll see the rejoining and the blue, you may have seen it before, you get the blue loader saying, hey, we're going to try again here in a little bit, and it will get moved to a new Jacofo server and then potentially new bridge and everything after that. There is the case where if it's like not hard down, but is like overrun with performance and people are struggling, but they're not like fully disconnected, you could have a conference pinned on a server where you're just having a bad time. That could happen. We don't detect that middle ground currently.
Gotcha.
Yeah, have you seen the problem I'm describing where Prosody restarts and then Jacofo gets basically into a bad state for a bunch of minutes?
Yes, we have. Yes, and we don't have a great explanation for it yet because we have never been at a point where we could actually trace what happened in the Prosody and what happened in the Jacofo to be able to tell where it went wrong. We do have an issue that is a known issue. I don't know if we've resolved it yet, where when the Jacofo restarts and the Prosody is in the midst of restarting, the Jacofo doesn't always join gracefully, and we might have to stop and restart it again.
Yeah, that's what we've seen too. So once you sort of kill Jacofo and restart it, everything is fine again.
We've absolutely seen that behavior, and I don't think we have a great explanation for it today.
Okay, great. Do you know about the Prosody memory usage? Do you have any experience, like sort of thresholds or?
I've seen absolutely that behavior with the spike in memory utilization, and it's one of the things in my backlog of things I'm trying to trace down. But to be honest, I haven't yet explored it thoroughly.
Matt from the Prosody team told us that memory is the limiting factor for Prosody. So that will be the thing that limits you and indicates if you can map it to, hey, it's being utilized more and memory shooting up, that's expected, and you need more, or I'm not saying there's nothing wrong there, but that is the known limiting thing in good Prosody.
Yeah, the surprising thing for us was just that it normally is very low, actually, the memory usage, and then just suddenly spikes seemingly out of nowhere. But for the time being, maybe we just give it more resources. I also have just a brief question about, do you have anywhere instructions on the build instructions for the Debian packages? Specifically, I see that the index.html and Jitsi meet uses this v equals 129 query parameter for cache busting, I'm assuming, and that seems to get somehow replaced in the Debian packages. I'm just curious how that works, or how the Debian builds get made, if you have any public instructions for that.
There are no public instructions. There are Jenkins jobs that currently run and build all the Debian packages. As we are moving, we're in a transition to changing all our versions to match the current JVB2 version, this semantic. And while doing that, we also create a Jenkins build script that is in the repo that you can use for building the packages. This is already the case for Jibri, JVB, even Jikofo, I think, even though we haven't moved the version there. So it's still a process we're doing. Probably NGT Meet will follow that at some point. So there will be the actual script that builds the packages will be exposed that way in the source code. But currently it's
a bash script that runs sed, I believe, to just replace a known string with the build number.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I just want to give a heads up, everyone. Normally we end this call at 30. This time we have more people. I'm going to give it 10 more minutes. Matt, it looked like you wanted to comment on the Prosody question. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, hey. I was just going to say, yeah, if you can correlate the memory usage with something, that would be interesting. If you have like a constant number of users and it spikes, then that really shouldn't happen unless you have a spike in traffic or something like that we have to deal with. There are some cases where we have had reports where the usage jumps up and doesn't go back down again. Usually this is due to fragmentation. We're currently doing a lot of investigation into how to make that better. It's not like that memory is actually being used by Prosody. It's just that it's not released back to the OS. So on monitoring graphs, it looks bad, but the memory will get recycled inside the Prosody process. But yeah, if you want to discuss memory specific stuff with Prosody, then feel free to email us at developers@prosody.im, and we're happy to help anytime.
And I can say he's always been helpful, so in case that helps.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for stopping. Chigai, you've had your hand raised. Persistence ends up paying, so.
Yeah, someone asked me to forward a question, so I'm just going to forward this question. My question is, what is the state of the iOS, iPad OS app, which is very basic compared to the web UI? Is there anything going on there? That's A. B, is Firefox Safari support? What's going on there?
Oh, great questions. So we're not currently paying any attention to iPad, or rather, we're paying minimal attention to iPad. I don't believe we have enough resources to look into that very nearly in the future. We'd rather focus on everything that's related to the pending end-to-end encryption, the performance optimizations, the some additional security hardenings that we're planning. So I wouldn't expect any changes on iPad. iOS app is, one of our main consumption points. So we do maintain and care for that always. But it could be, we're not always striving for 100% feature parity. So it could be that some features land earlier on desktop and that they don't necessarily have their counterparts on iOS. With regard to Firefox, such a vast topic. We are currently working, I don't know if Jaya is on the call. Jaya has almost completed, oh, here he is. Jaya, would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So we were able to actually push a new version for SDP interrupt, the module that we use for converting Plan B to unified SDP format. So we just pushed out a new version 1.00, which introduces a lot of changes in how we do the conversion. So, and the major updates to that is like we are now able to actually start. So we reuse the inactive M line so that we mark whenever a source leaves, we mark them inactive, and then whenever new source joins, we reuse those M lines. And also we can actually create peer-to-peer connections now. So, and there are some more. You should be able to see all those fixes in the PR over there. And so that's in, and we have PRs merged into the Jitsi Meet, which makes us, where we switch to the transceiver model, and then we use replace track on the WebRTC peer connection for replacing a track on the connection. I mean, we are not going to be generating new SSRCs whenever we change streams, and it's all going to be seamless whenever we change sources. So both the PR, I mean, the first one has landed, and then we are in the process of planning the second one. And we'll go through a little beta testing, and then I think we'll hopefully release it soon. And same goes with Zip Farm.
That is great. So I was just, thank you, Jay. I would just wanted to add that hopefully, so we might do UGC release this week. I don't know if this PR would have been tested enough to make it by then. That might potentially happen, but if it doesn't make this week, then it should land within the next 2 or maximum 3 weeks. Now, what that suggests is everything that we could do to make things better. The Firefox team is also working very hard on adding support for RTX and transport wide bandwidth estimations. I think their latest position on the question was that given that these are not critical, wouldn't be qualified as critical security updates, they don't justify port back to current stable versions, so they will come within 6 weeks, I believe. Now, the changes that Jaya has implemented, I would say already make the situation vastly better. So all Firefox users should get a way more decent experience within the next 2 or 3 weeks. Hopefully that answers the question. We have 7 more minutes.
Thank you very much. That was a good answer.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jaya.
Yeah. I was wondering if suppose we face any technical difficulties, who should be the single point of contact, or how can we get in touch with your technical team if we have any issues for you?
Our best place for asking questions is community.jitsi.org. We try to be active with regard to questions on our, social platforms, but it's not always easy to help in 280 characters. So if you do have technical questions, try community.jitsi.org.
I have a question for Boris.
Sorry, Mohan, I didn't catch that.
Do you have a Slack group?
I think the question is if we had a Slack room.
Oh, we do not currently maintain a Slack room. We do have this call, though. However, there's only so much we can handle in an hour. There was someone that had a question for Boris.
Yes, for Boris. You mentioned you're working on the Octo revamp to scale more people per conference. And since Jitsi Meet right now forwards every thumbnail to everybody, my assumption is that you're going to stop doing that to scale and only pick maybe most recent speakers or something like that. I was wondering if you could speak to how many people you're trying to scale to and what your kind of architecture is in terms of managing conversations and forwarding streams to accomplish that.
Sure. So there's a few things that we do in order to scale better. Octo is one of them. What you're referring to with not sending thumbnails to everyone. One of the ways we do this is with last time, which is currently not enabled, which is exactly what you mentioned. It forwards only the last N speakers. Also note that all this is subject to bandwidth constraints.
Well,
if someone doesn't have enough. Yeah.
Sorry, I think you were about to say what I was going to say.
Yeah, so if a participant does not have enough downstream bandwidth, we will not forward all the thumbnails. We will only forward however many fit.
And I want to stress that this is already deployed. So adaptive last N is currently on production. It's active in this call. If we detect that we're not able to send you everything, we're not going to try to. Not a perfect algorithm though, might misfire, but there it is. It's deployed.
Is there a way of picking which thumbnails, like yourself, would be forwarded?
Yeah, we just do the last N active speakers. Sorry, Boris, go.
If you click on someone on a thumbnail, it will get selected and you will certainly receive it with the highest possible quality. Other than that, depends on whether you're using GT Meet, which only has this feature. If you're using the bridge in a different environment, you can use a list of pinned endpoints that are always forwarded to everyone.
Okay, so just to be clear, the new Octo for maximum capacity will only forward N speakers between the servers. Is that right?
No, currently it forwards everything between the servers. That's something we are going to work on in the future, but right now everything is forwarded between servers.
Well, then how do you plan on using Octo to increase capacity of the rooms?
Having more than one server distributes the load, even though all the streams are forwarded.
Oh, okay.
So to maybe help with that, if you have 100 participants on one bridge, that's, in the simplistic case, that is essentially 100 times 99 streams going out of that bridge, right? If you split them on two bridges, even though you're forwarding everything, it is essentially 51 times 99 streams on one bridge and 51 on the other. So you've essentially halved the requirements, even though you're forwarding everything. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, so last question or last follow-up. How many people per conference are you trying to aim for?
Right now, our goal is to be able to reliably support 100.
Okay, thank you.
So the point of this work is not only to increase the number, because the number, not huge difference between 75 and 100. The problem is that right now, a conference of 75 being on a single bridge, kind of like takes a toll on that specific bridge, and it could end up in weird states with regard to other conferences. Being able to spread conferences across bridges is also very much a load balancing technique where you could just, if you end up not having enough resources on a specific bridge after conferences have started, then it solves that issue as well.
Is that a limit of the currently chosen number of CPUs? Like if we went with a beefier server, how much could you scale up that 75 limit?
Well, a lot. So so it really depends on who you're hosting. So if you take me, Jitsi, where various people come from various places, and let's take a very weak server, right? And let's just imagine it takes 10 conferences, right? Statistically, it is very unlikely for all of them to become 75 participant conferences. But if they all end up being 75 participant conferences, that would be very bad for that bridge, right? This is the problem. If you're controlling the people who come to your bridge, then you can solve that problem by just access control before that, and you can have a beefy enough server that does 100 or 200 people that'll manage this, right? And how beefy that server has to be really depends a lot on the utilization, but just go as beefy as you can. One more minute for any final comments or questions.
Somebody in the chat was asking for clarification on we consider iOS a primary platform, but not the iPad. Can you speak to that again?
Oh yeah, we do not consider adjustments for iPad that go out of the generic iOS, like iPhone being the primary target situation. So whatever runs on iPhones is our priority. It's making it work for iPad specifically that is not.
Cool.
I hope that answers the question. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining. We're going to go back to work here, and looking forward to seeing you again 2 weeks from now. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for your great work.
Bye.
I'm just gonna stay.